Hey there folks, Mr. Findlay here. This is a short video on the principles of lighting design. It's going to get into a little bit more depth than some of the other videos you've looked at. Um, the same principles of lighting design can be said for set design. In the set design video, there's that checklist of the things that the set design has to do in terms of letting us know the mood of the play and the tone and the time period. Lighting can be said to do all those things as well, but there may be an easier way to look at it. When it comes to designing lighting, there are sort of four things that as a designer you can manipulate. When we think of designing lighting, you can't touch lighting, you can't hammer on it. So how do you manipulate it? Well, there are four different things. The first we can think of is distribution. This is literally, where are the lights? For every show, you hang the lights anew. You move them around on the grid because distributing them differently moves those lights around on stage and changes what the audience sees. So unlike just as we build a different set, we don't reuse the set. Typically, we build a different light plot every time we do a show. We don't just leave the lights hanging up there in the same spots, because distribution, where things are shining and the angles that they're shining, are going to affect what we see. The next is intensity. This is just the brightness of a given light. A certain light that is dim, that same exact light that is shining brightly on something, changes what the audience sees. The next element that you can manipulate is movement. Does a light move around? Does it follow a given character? That can be done by having literally the light move, whether that's a follow spot or whether that's an instrument that has a mirror in it that allows the beam to move, or it can be movement by turning off one light and turning on a different light to follow movement. And the final thing that you can manipulate is color. Color is very powerful and is really one of the most useful things that lighting can do, because the colors that are shown by the lights are the colors that then the costume and the set pick up. By changing the color of a scene, color of a light, you can change the perception of the time of day or the temperature and all those things. So those four things, distribution, intensity, movement, and color, are the four things that you can manipulate when you're designing lights. Well, once you manipulate those things, what are the things that changes in terms of the audience's perception? What do those lights do? The first and most basic thing is visibility. You want to make sure that you have lights distributed and intense enough that everything that the audience needs to see, they can see. And there's not an important thing that's happening in darkness and the audience can't see it. The basic thing for a lighting designer to do is to make sure that using distribution and intensity primarily, but also movement and color, that everything that's important is visible. The second thing is selective focus. Unlike a movie screen where the camera will focus on what's important, whether that's a doorknob turning in the background or someone coming down a flight of stairs, you can't focus the audience's attention that way on stage because the whole stage is visible the whole time. The closest thing you can get to that, though, is to use light to guide the eye. The human eye will automatically look at what's brightest. So by being clever about what you have dimmed and what you have brighter, you can guide the audience's eye around the stage and give it some of that selective focus. I'll show a picture in just a second to give you an example of that. The next thing that lighting can do is modeling. Modeling is to bring out the dimensions of something by the use of both light and shadow to make it look more truly three-dimensional. What this does is it makes the otherwise flat plane of the picture, especially in a proscenium stage, look deeper, look more sculptural, if you want to think of it that way. And the fourth thing that lighting can do, and this is a huge thing, is to set the mood. Is this bright and cheerful? Is it dark and shadowed? Is it colorful? Is it stark? Is it warm? Is it cold? All of those elements of mood that we ascribe to a play can really be given most powerfully through lighting, both through intensity, distribution, but lots of color. Color is really how we do this. In the same picture, if you look at the two pictures on top, this is the same arrangement of people on stage. But this is an example of how you can use lighting for selective focus. The first one is just a general wash of lights. Everything is lit equally, and in that picture on the left, it varies what your eye goes to. The picture on the right, however, notice how everything is in darkness except for a spotlight right on her face. And so the eye goes straight to her face. That's what we are really looking at there. So that's how you can use lighting to direct the eye the same way that you would use camera movement to direct the eye in a movie. Okay, so those are the things that you can manipulate, and those are the effects that they can create that you can be keeping in mind when you're designing lights. Here's a practical thing, however. Just shining a light at something does not necessarily make it look good. It can usually make it look pretty bad, like the light that's shining on my face right now. So when you're designing lights, you want to distribute those lights in such a way that the actor is modeled correctly. So here's some examples. Take a look at the upper left picture there. This is with a light, as you can see in the arrow, shining straight into the actor's face. It's not bad. We can see the actor, but see how flat it is. There's no real shadow to help us get a sense of dimension or contour. The second picture, this is when we're lit not from the front, but just from the sides, if you're looking at the arrows there. This gives us lots of shadow, lots of contour, but we're losing the important details of the face, so that doesn't work so well. Oftentimes that sort of side lighting is used in dance concerts, where you're really trying to have some very dramatic sort of side angles. The third picture there on top, where we don't see the actor's face at all, this is just being lit from behind. This gives us a sort of a halo, not very practical. So all three of those aren't ideal. So you want to start to combine those angles to get the actor modeled correctly. The lower left picture there shows a combination of front, side, and back lighting. This is the best of them up to this point, but it's still a little bit flat because there's so much light coming right into the actor's face. So really the best way is what we call a key and a fill light. That's the middle picture on the bottom. This is where we have one light coming in from the front and the side, sort of at an angle, so we get both shadow and illumination. We call that the key light. And then another light coming in at the opposite angle, about 45 degrees, called the fill light, which fills in some of those shadows. This gives us more contour. What you can't quite see in that picture, though, is that without light from the back, the actor sort of blends into the set. There's nothing that makes them pop. So ideally, if you look at that bottom right picture, this is a combination of light. The key and the fill light coming in on angles from the front, as well as a headlight coming in from behind and above to separate out the actor from the back. So ideally, you want to have the actor lit from those three angles. Here's the problem. Actors move around the stage, and a given light will only cover a cone of a certain degree. So if you are going to have those three angles of light on the actor, no matter where they moved in the space, as well as considering that usually when you have lighting, you change the color by having a colored gel in the light. We'll talk about that in another video, which means that for every time you change color, you have to change lights. If you were to have those three lights for every possible position on stage, plus additional lights for color, you would need to have a lot of lights. Look at this lighting plot here. Notice how incredibly complicated it is. This is a standard lighting plot that gets that sort of three-point lighting, key, fill, and headlight with multiple colors. And notice how complicated that is, how we have literally dozens of lights in the air. This is why lighting design is incredibly complicated. It's not just shining a light on something. Now, in our space, you're lucky. It's a smaller theater, so you don't need to have as many lights coming in from as many angles to get coverage. Also, the grid where we hang the lights is comparatively low. It's 11 feet, so you don't have to have quite as many instruments for that reason. And finally, we have LED lights which change color, so you don't need to have multiple instruments to get multiple colors. So on our grid, taking a look, this is a plot of how you would draw on a lighting plot, different instruments. On ours, the primary instruments we're going to be using There on the right, you see the 6x22 ERS. That's means elliptical. That's a sort of a spotlight. We have two of those, which form our primary key and fill lights. They're the big, really expensive source 4 lights, they're called, that are hung far downstage over the audience. And that provides most of our key and our fill light. They're on two angles crossing the stage from far downstage. We also have what are called PARs, PAR cans. There's a PAR 64. We have 9 of those, and those are used for effect lights, and they are used for backlight as well, and sometimes side light if the key and the fill light isn't sufficient. Those move around. They have a much narrower. Well, it's more of a wash type of light. It's sort of a ball of light as opposed to a neatly defined beam like you get from the source 4s. So the types of documents you'll be creating, creating a fairly simplified version of that lighting plot that uses just the instruments that we have to show where they're distributed. You'll also be creating something called an instrument schedule. Every light has a number. We call that the address. It's got another number called the patch. And these are how our control system talks to that light. And then it uses other commands to determine its intensity and its color variously. There's another video on those, but just to know that you'll be creating a schedule like this that lets us know where every instrument is and what its address is so that the software can talk to it. You'll also be creating a document that is the cue list itself. This is a list of all of the lighting cues within the show. That is, every time the look of the stage under the lighting changes, whether we go to a blackout and we come back up, or whether we have a spotlight on something, or whether we more subtly change the lighting or the color. Every time there's a change, that's a new lighting cue, and that is added to this light cue list. So those are the documents that the lighting designer makes: the light plot, the fixture schedule, as well as the lighting cue list. So those are some pieces of information on the process of lighting design.